What's up guys, John here and welcome back to John Moon Studios. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Vienna Ensemble Pro. This has been one of the most requested videos from you guys. And today specifically, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of using a software like VEP. This software might not be for everyone, but for composers or producers who have very complex workflows, this actually might be very beneficial to you. So let's get right to it. So Vienna Ensemble Pro, which I have opened up right behind me, is a software that allows you to host your samples, your sounds, VST, even plugins, so that you're able to alleviate some of the computer resources and maybe put it on a different computer, or you can have it on a single computer and just have it open across, let's say, multiple sessions. So we're going to go through the pros first, and the first thing on the list is efficiency. So VEP is very good at hosting plugins, it's good at hosting VSTs, and pretty much any samples that you may have, so that you have it available across different sessions. So for example, let's say you have one computer and you have 2 or 3 different Logic sessions or Cubase sessions open. You don't want to keep reloading the same plugins or maybe the same VSTs across those 3 different sessions. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up a software like Vienna Ensemble Pro. You're going to have it run in the background with all of the sounds already loaded into it. And every time you open up a new session, you're going to have a template that's connected to VEP so that it's always pulling sounds and plugins from that software. Again, this is good for opening up very large projects and also being able to handle workflow and not have to load up all of those instruments all over again. Another huge advantage of having something like VEP is when you start to use multiple computers at a time. So for example, I have my Mac Studio behind me. I'm running a Cubase session, but my actual sounds are not coming from the Mac Studio. It's actually coming from the custom built PC I have under the desk, and it's completely loaded with CPU and RAM so that it's able to handle a large template inside of VEP. So what I do is I open up that software inside of my PC. I'm going to load up all of the instruments, and then with one cable, an Ethernet cable, I'm going to run all of that into my Mac Studio. And now when I play the MIDI keyboard on my Mac Studio, it's going to be playing sounds from the PC. And what that does is it alleviates that CPU and RAM for the Mac Studio so it can do more important things, like for example, handle the playback, handle any plugins that I'm using directly from the Mac Studio. And it's leaving all of the heavy load of the MIDI sounds on the PC. So now we're going to the second benefit of having VEP, which is the streamlined workflow. So what this means is, let's say you're going to start a session in the day, and as a film composer, you need to load up, let's say, about 800 different tracks all at once. So what you do at the start of each of your session is you're going to go ahead and boot up your PC, you're going to boot up the Mac Studio, and then you're going to load the VEP software. Once the VEP software is loaded with all of your sounds, and you have your template set up inside of Cubase, you're pretty much good to go for the entire day. This allows for a very streamlined workflow and also just allows you to move from project to project very seamlessly if you're using the same exact sounds. And as a film composer, you're generally using the same libraries that you have. So for example, you have things like Keyscape, you have things like Cinesamples, you have maybe some Spitfire audio stuff. Everything is already loaded and ready to go. So the third pro or benefit for having VEP is that it's cross-compatible. So notice how I'm running my Mac Studio and then I have my PC under the desk running a copy of Windows 11. It doesn't matter what operating system you're running on, as long as the software is compatible with the operating system that you're using, you should be fine. So for example, if you can't get maybe the latest software update on your system, maybe the one right before it, but you don't want your system to be too old where you can't have any of the new updates for VEP. So benefit number 4 of using VEP is a very high quality mixer hosting platform. So not only does it host your samples, you can also do some pre-mixing inside of VEP. And the great thing is that you're always going to get very high quality sounds. So it's almost like if I'm hosting those sounds inside of my Mac Studio. To dive a little bit deeper on the mixing portion, What I mean is, well, right here I have my session open. You can kind of see that it has some faders on it. So what that means is that I can actually pre-mix some of my stems. I could pre-mix some of the violins. Let's say I know that, for example, the basses in my string section, it's a little bit overpowering. I can actually mix and put maybe an EQ or a multi-band compressor or something like that to tame a little bit of the low end so that it's not so overbearing when I'm actually going into the mixing stage. So it's a really great way for you to get some pre-mixes done and also pump out a lot of tracks without wasting too much time in post-production. Since you are using the same samples over and over again, it's very easy to get this set up if you take some time beforehand to set up the template. And then the fifth benefit of having a software like VEP hosting your sounds plugins is that you can scale your studio up however big or however small you want. So for example, if you are a full-time film composer, you're more than likely having a multi-computer setup, not just two. You'll probably have 3, 4, sometimes even 5, depending on how large your sessions are. And what that means is that you're going to have, let's say, my main computer, which is the Mac Studio, and I have the custom PC under my desk, and then I have maybe another PC running different sounds or different sets of instruments, and so on and so forth. I do know of composers who actually have a series of Mac Minis, that each Mac Mini is responsible for, let's say, an entire string section or an entire brass section or an entire woodwind section. They separate out all of those computers so that they're only handling one instrument set. In my case, I don't feel like I need to have a separate computer for the different instrument sets. I feel like just one PC hosting that and then my Mac Studio just kind of handling everything else is pretty good for me. My PC is pretty powerful. I have a Ryzen 9 AMD CPU chip, which is about 16 cores, and I can hyper-thread that to 32 cores. And then I also have 128 gigs of RAM inside of my PC. My Mac is also very powerful. It's the M1 Ultra. I have 128 gigabytes of RAM. But again, I don't use any plugins inside of the Mac Studio. Everything is hosted down in the PC. So now, of course, we heard all of the pros, at least some of the pros that I gave you. And now let's talk a little bit of the cons, which is not really a bad thing. It's more of a subjective thing. So the first con is going to be the actual setup of it. So being able to use a software like VEP, especially if you're using a multi-computer setup, even if it is just 2 computers, can be very complex. You do have to have a little bit of understanding of networking, IP addresses, and then you also need to have a basic understanding on like how processing works on a computer. Simply because when you connect your PC to the Mac, you do have to do some manual IP setup so that the Mac Studio and the PC can connect to each other and know that they're there. Why is that important? Well, because the PC needs to understand that if I click a note on the MIDI keyboard, it's to trigger that specific sound. And the only way that it knows that is if you do a proper connection between the PC and the Mac Studio. And it's all done through an Ethernet cable. This program is not suited for beginners. I would say this program is actually suited for either really advanced professional musicians, artists, simply because it's not worth the hassle of going through this setup if you're not using, let's say, very large template sounds. The second con to VEP is the cost of it. So VEP can get pretty pricey. I'll go ahead and leave a link down below so you can see the most updated price on VEP. But VEP also comes with extra little plugins, like I believe it's called Vienna Ensemble Pro, which is their own set of plugin where you can actually sit the instruments. If you're doing film composing, you could sit players in the exact places that they are in the orchestra, and you're able to really get specific on how you want that orchestral sound. But I'm just using the VEP 7. Con number 3 is going to be the actual system that you're using. So the resource. Can your computer handle a program like Vienna Ensemble Pro in it? If you don't have that much RAM in your computer, I don't recommend having a software like VEP on your computer running, because you have to remember, if I'm loading sounds into a computer, that means I'm going to be eating up that RAM. So let's say you need to go into the internet for whatever reason. If you have your RAM capped out at, let's say, 32 gigs with VEP running in the background, you're not going to be able to do anything else on your computer because the RAM is already being taken up by the sounds. So you need to make sure that your computer has enough RAM has enough processing power to be able to host a program like VEP. So for example, the specs that I gave you for my PC and my Mac Studio, mind you, I'm only using this PC to host sounds. I'm not doing anything else on this PC. I just have Vienna Ensemble Pro running like you see behind. I know you can see it's kind of color coded right here, but these are the different instrument sections that I was talking about. So I have purple is strings, I have the blue one is woodwinds, then I have brass, and so on and so forth. But the PC is only doing that. So I literally just turn it on, load up Vienna Ensemble Pro, forget about the PC, unless I need to go in and maybe switch some sounds, or I need to fix a little glitch or something like that. You could also do this on one system, but you need to make sure that you have plenty of RAM. My Mac Studio behind me has 128 gigs. I can definitely maybe grab 64 of those gigs and just use it for Vienna Ensemble Pro, and then I have another 64 to run my program, run my softwares, and also if I need to go into a website really quick or do anything on the computer, basic tasks, I have enough processing power to do that too. So con number 4 is going to be latency issue. This kind of goes hand in hand with the previous con, and it could be your system performance. If your computer is not powerful enough, you could run into some latency issues, which means if I press, let's say, a note on the keyboard here, it's going to have a delay before the sound actually starts, and it could get quite annoying to work that way. We generally don't want to have any latency. At least in my system, if I play the keyboard, I get a sound instantly, so I don't need to worry about any latency issues. But that is also something to consider if you are trying to get a software like Vienna Ensemble. And then the 5th con is going to be the learning curve. So using a software like Vienna Ensemble Pro is a very, very complex software. You don't just want to hop into a software like this and think you're going to know what's going on. It's really complex to just set everything up and get everything working together. I'd recommend just sticking to the basic, just kind of putting one plugin at a time, or maybe do like a rack instruments or like a multi-output if you're using Logic. Use something like that in the beginning, just so you can start getting used to routing signal, just so you can get used to, how to create multiple outputs for one channel. Just simple things like that so that you can start understanding what VEP is doing to your workflow. VEP is very powerful if you do understand how to use it, and it could be a very, very good resource to have, especially if you are at that level when you can take on a software like that. For my workflow, it has been extremely helpful because I usually have maybe about 800 tracks in my session, maybe a little bit more than that. I actually deleted some instruments because I wasn't using it, but I have roughly around 800 track, and it is a huge time saver because if I'm jumping from one project to another, I don't need to load up 800 tracks anymore and then route the instruments to the correct place and then put a reverb on the track. I already have those things set up as a template inside of my Cubase project. So that is all for the pros and cons of using a software like VEP. I do want to take this opportunity, if you reach the end of this video, if you're interested in joining my members only club inside of YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe to that on my channel. If you want to learn how to connect a PC or another Mac to your main Mac or PC, I have a video there giving a very detailed explanation on how to connect those two computers together, how to have them communicating with each other. I'll also have a separate video on how to create a master template with all of these sounds. I'll also have other behind the scenes content. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and drop your comments down below if you have any questions. I will see you guys in the next video.